So Mark Brandau, he's the Associate Director of Content for Datassential, and he's going to be talking to us about, the topic is somewhat, it's inflation, but it's also what's going on in our world today. What are consumers, how are they changing? What are they doing? So I think that's going to be really interesting for all of us, both our sponsors and members, to see what's going on there. And we have a group of members and sponsors that are going to come on. Mike Turner, who's with Walk-Ons Enterprises, Jason Knoll, who's with Another Broken Egg, Stan Dorsey with Beef O'Grady's and Brass Tap, Kyle Watts from Ripple Foodservice. Again, thanks everyone for being on. Mark, let's go to you and get started.
The discussion today is about inflation, but it's not just that, it's really the industry's reaction to it. And we have been tracking this for a while, really for the last, I would say, intensely for the last quarter or so, but we have many data going back, through the last couple of years that can kind of show you how the industries are responding to inflation. And the first thing that we want to do is, if you guys want to say your guess in the comments, we like to do that at Datassential a lot. Sort of open up to the gallery to get some participation that way. I'm afraid that I can't see responses, so maybe Kevin can narrate there if we see a lot of guesses, but. When we ask consumers,
I'll do that.
Yeah, great. And, we were asking consumers, are you seeing signs of inflation, and prices rising in general in the economy? When we asked this question back in May, that was about 80% of people. But more recently, we asked this in this month, and that number grew to 96%. And probably the only people that are saying no probably misclicked and clicked on the wrong thing. So this is effectively 100%. Effectively, everybody can't get away from these signs of inflation. And
everybody's agreeing with you, Mark.
Yeah, I bet. And to be sure, this is very, very high. But let's look at it in the context of inflation in the United States, kind of in our recent history here. It's bad right now, especially compared with recent years, but. Going back to the left side of this chart, those, very, very big spikes in the 70s and also, early 80s, we have been here before, but it's been a long time for a lot of us and certainly a long time for our industry. But this is just to give you guys some context that, inflation has been higher than the kind of 8% level we're experiencing right now, but not for a while. And it's certainly being driven by events. When we put it in context of the rest of the world, the United States is at a pretty high level. If you take out the outliers like Turkey and Argentina, for whatever reason, they definitely have, extreme levels of inflation right now that they were dealing with in February. But the U.S. is definitely on the high end. And if you consider the kind of 2% target that the Fed likes to keep our economy at, in a normal time, much of the world is running above, that sort of baseline level of inflation that we all seem to be able to handle. And the other thing too is that, consumers are definitely noticing. We just showed you that effectively all of them have seen signs of this. And unfortunately, they are kind of digging in for this inflationary environment to last for a while. When we asked this question just this month, or last month, I should say, in March, effectively, 3/4 of people are saying that this isn't going to get much better, at least until the end of the year, probably into next year, before we feel much relief. And even, about 8% of people think that this kind of cycle could last forever. Most economists do not agree with that, but one thing that's sort of important to note here is that these measures are broadly up from the last time that we asked this question, which was at the end of 2021. And I think a big difference there, we had far more people saying that this could be over in a few months, but the more recent events, specifically another COVID variant kind of lurking in the background here, this BA2 variant, But probably more relevant is the global conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which does have a follow-on effect of higher energy prices right now. That has really driven up a spike in gasoline prices. And we all know, our customers and consumers are incredibly sensitive to that input in the budget because it's so volatile and pretty inelastic. And I think we kind of recognize this as well. Unfortunately for our industry, what happens is that one of the first places that people will look to cut back on their spending in order to make their ends meet is that they do tend to cut back out on dining out. And when you compare the two times we've asked this question, we asked it at the end of 2021, we asked it again last month. The rank order of where people look to save money doesn't really change, but unfortunately for us, the gap is widening at the top there, where half of people are looking to cut back on dining out. And also, there are a lot of occasions there that sort of have a restaurant meal attached to them. Quite often when you are traveling, if you're going out to see, a show, whether that's a game or a concert, those also have to, fill the gas tank as well when you do those things. So not just restaurant meals, but, a lot of occasions where restaurant operators depend on kind of that follow-on foot traffic, those are all under pressure right now. Definitely more so than other things like housing, where it's too hard to kind of find a better deal on rent or a mortgage right now. So that's kind of the lever that people can pull the least. But the easiest adjustment to make for a lot of people, unfortunately, is on deciding to go out rather than to stay in and eat at home. We mentioned, though, that a lot of this is being driven by inflation and gasoline prices. I am told that this is a picture of the Beverly Center in Los Angeles, like in the West Hollywood area. It's kind of a famous place where, the menu boards of the gas stations are where we go to photograph high gas prices. So I know that in parts of Southern California, people are saying, they told us in our last webinar that they were paying certainly more than $6 per gallon. Some places as high as $7 or $8, the Mendocino area. So it's definitely top of mind right now. To put it in context, you can see that at the very right end of this chart, that spike in gasoline prices, it's pretty steep. It's almost straight up. And that, again, is reflecting, I think, more recent events, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and kind of how that is causing a huge supply disruption in the global market for gas and gasoline. The few things that are kind of in our control as a nation, releasing some of our strategic petroleum reserves, that's a necessary move, but it'll take a while for that to kind of get into the supply and start bringing those prices down. So probably more likely, the demand is what's going to cause that to come down, hopefully. Just another way to graph it here that we can visualize and show you is that, this top line here, those are the, prices day by day in 2022. So they were already elevated compared with other, periods a year or a few years earlier. And then just more recently, that's a very, very kind of steep climb in a very short time that your guests are doing right now. And what that translates to very broadly is, gasoline taking up a lot more of consumers' budgets. More than 3/4 of our guests and customers say that they're paying, more to fill up their gas tanks. And the way that the question was worded, it's just about how much more are you paying, not necessarily how much you are cutting back on driving or trying to drive shorter distances. So this includes people that have tried to adjust how often or how far they drive. They're still paying more. And if you put it in a different context, just in real terms of real dollars, the averages that we're showing here, they come from either Kelley Blue Book or AAA. I forget which one, but it's from a kind of a reputable source of these sorts of averages. If the average person drives a little bit more than 14,000 miles a year, and the average engine is getting about 24 miles per gallon, roughly. That's about 600 gallons of fuel that you have to buy for your car. And for each consumer, if a gallon of gas is costing upwards of $2 more, then that translates to about $1,200 per year, or $100 a month that people don't have to put toward other sorts of spending. And for a lot of us, if we did well in the past year and maybe got a raise in our paycheck, it's pretty possible that for a lot of us, $100 a month going into gas probably eats up a lot of our gains too. So broadly, this shows you just how much only the fuel piece of inflation is really putting a damper on people's spending power. And it's not just gasoline, of course. There are just dozens, if not hundreds, of categories that the Department of Commerce tracks to see how much inflation is affecting each part that a person can spend their money on. Here are just a couple of examples. I'll go through them kind of quickly if you've seen this before, but the really big one here, the really big spike on the right, that's for not new cars but used cars. And so if you've tried to buy a car recently, even if you can get financing for it, the sticker price you have to pay for it is up quite a bit. Same with hotel stays and lodging away from home, or to rent a car or truck. Those affect not just the travel line item, but it limits what you can do if you are trying to travel. And on the other end, let's just say consumer IT and consumer technology broadly, especially for smartphones, those prices have come down. I think there's a lot of Moore's law happening there, where as these things get better, more advanced, the prices do tend to come down a little bit. Video discs are because nobody is buying DVDs or CDs anymore. But what's important for us is that very, very broadly, total food prices and total food inflation is right there at that 7.9% level, which is what the average total inflation is for everything. But it's not totally even. Total food might be 7.9%, just like inflation broadly for the entire basket of goods you can buy and track. But the split between food at home and food away from home, right now, that's falling disproportionately on the retail food sector and supermarkets. Those costs and those prices are up more severely for food at home than for food away from home. But and consumers are noticing that too. Consumers really can't avoid grocery shopping, so they are going to have a perception either way of prices rising or falling. And so when we ask consumers, when we did most recently in March, wherever you shop for food, where are you noticing price fluctuations? The vast majority of them are noticing that at the supermarket for both groceries and for prepared food. But it's not completely to restaurants' benefit, because most people do notice some price hikes at restaurants as well. And one thing that I would point out too is that the apparent inflation, or what people are noticing as higher prices for third-party delivery apps, is lower than that of traditional restaurants. Part of that, I think, is because those prices were already high to begin with, on an apparent basis. So they had a little bit less room to maneuver up. But still, just as it's perceived by consumers, no one's in a really great position right now. I'm going to go through the slide pretty quickly here. I'm not going to name all these categories here because there are dozens of them, but very, very broadly, all of the categories of food inflation are not uniformly rising to the same degree. When we did this presentation a week ago to our Datassential audience, we again invited folks in the comments to kind of take guesses as to what they thought the lowest and the highest inflation categories were of what they were buying or what they were seeing in grocery stores. I'll skip that sort of guessing period now and just sort of get into it, starting with what's kind of experiencing the lowest levels of inflation. And broadly, it's categories like produce, some dairy categories like cheese and ice cream, and then also beverages are not seeing quite the level of inflation that other ones are. You probably don't need me to tell you this, and you can probably already guess that a lot of the categories with the highest inflation right now are these protein categories. Especially beef and pork. There's a lot that goes into, but there are a lot of inputs that go into raising livestock and meat, right? Whether it is the cost of fertilizer, a lot of which comes from Russia. It takes a lot of fuel to run a giant farm. And then, water and other sources of energy. So that's all kind of combining to really drive up the cost for a lot of our proteins right now. And what we're going to see later in this presentation is that that's really going to affect how we have pricing power or not when we're developing, promoting, and pricing our entrees. So I will kind of get into that right now. This is going to be a very quick rundown of some data from Datassential's menu trends tool. We have inputs from menus from thousands of restaurants in the United States. We track a lot of that over time, not only for culinary trends and what flavors and prep styles are, growing and proliferating, but also we do have pricing information that's helped us get a good read on the situation in just the last quarter here. So in the last 12 months, we'll take that 12-month period that ended with the end of 2021. Through that period, the total inflation measured in the US was 7%. And during the same period, we also know how much menu prices broadly rose from all of the data that we were able to collect. And so knowing that that food away from home prices weren't rising quite as fast as food at home prices, it makes sense that this level of inflation came in a little bit under total. So in general, menu prices across all industry segments taken in total, those menu prices rose by an average of 5.7% to end 2021. And there are two ways to go about it broadly, right? You can either take a look at your entire menu in total and try to come up with the small level of price increase you can take across the whole menu to sort of spread that pain around. Or you can take a more strategic approach and take a few items where you might have some pricing power and maybe bump those up by a larger amount. Those might be the items where your inputs are increasing the most. That might be your best sellers. They might be someplace where the price was low enough that you had some room to maneuver. So Datassential's position is not that one is better than the other. We think that it's obviously a very nuanced question, and it makes sense differently for whatever your operation is, where it's located, and what your clientele is like. But what we have seen in our data is that most operators are going with the latter approach, which is kind of a targeted and aggressive way of doing it, taking a few items and then really increasing those menu prices there. But it doesn't fall equally across the industry by segment. Typically, I think that we've seen the highest menu price inflation in limited service restaurants, and then a little bit lower menu price hikes in full service restaurants. And the higher up the service scale you go, the less menu price inflation there has been. But it makes sense that that's probably due to the fact that the prices in fine dining are already higher than casual dining, are already higher than mid-scale. So there's probably a little bit less room to maneuver. And then there was probably a little bit more from limited service price points to go. We have a couple of different ways to look at it here. And the first way that I'll get into is by industry segment. Again, here are those total inflation numbers that I just showed you on the previous slide. But if we look at, we go through each menu across these segments and we take a look at how much of the menu they decided to alter. For a lot of cases, it's different by industry segment. So we saw that the total inflation was higher for limited service restaurants. They are also tending to take a deeper look at more of their menu items and make changes to the price points attached to them. And it's less the case the further up the chain scale you go, especially with fine dining. And the other thing here, which is interesting, is that when you look just at the menu items that did have a price change, we look at the degree to which those menu prices rose. There, it's a little bit more uniform. There, restaurants are kind of taking the same amount of menu price increase. It just depends on what kind of restaurant you are, how many of those menu items you decide to take that level of increase for. So it's really, really interesting here where the number of items you decide to target change depending on what kind of restaurant you run. We really don't see that kind of difference or stratification by location, which was a little bit surprising because we sort of had a working hypothesis that there would be significantly more price taken in urban markets because they tend to have a lot more limited service restaurants and fine dining. So there might have been an effect there, but it really does kind of even out nationwide when we look at it, among urban, suburban, rural. But those differences get kind of elided. But when we look a different way, we look at it by menu part. And here is another instance where people decide to target different places on the menu with different levels this time of price increase too. So this is across the entire industry. So all restaurants from quick service to fine dining, they tend to alter their beverages at least. The total inflation for beverages really does not rise too much, at least not in total. There's a bigger total rise for entrees, appetizers, and sides. But what's interesting here is that more than half of the entrees across all menus, across all industry segments, are getting a look in terms of a menu item where we can take some price. The number of adult beverages that are being looked at as an opportunity there, way lower, and then to a lesser extent, that's the case also for non-alcoholic beverages and sides and desserts. So when we look at all of the menu items that were altered by menu part, within them, I think that the biggest increases are going to side dishes because I think that they have the most wiggle room to grow. And then the entree prices are being raised to a smaller degree, but there are just so many more entrees that are getting that look. So there are lots of ways to go, and it's pretty interesting, I think, to see these tables kind of broken out that way. Here's another way to kind of look at that dynamic. So the green bars on the bottom, this is the level of inflation by dollar amount for all items in that category. And then the pink bars kind of above them, that's the average price increase among those items that did get a price increase. So if you decide to do something, to what degree do you do it? That's represented by the pink bar. And so now when we look at alcoholic beverages, this is pretty interesting. There aren't as many cocktails and wine and beer and other offerings in that category that get their prices raised, but when they do, it's pretty significant. It's a pretty high multiple, compared with other menu categories. So I think that a lot of locations where they tend to, get their margins back from the drinkers. And then that dynamic is a little bit, less stated in things like non-alcoholic beverages and side dishes. And then for entrees, again, the most menu price inflation broadly by dollar amount across all entrees occurs there. But then that multiple is not quite so bad as you see compared with adult beverages. Excuse me. The last way that we'll slice this and dice this is by price point. And so the one thing to note here is that the fewest places where we look to perhaps take a price increase are going to be those higher priced items, that are really those high mental anchors on your menu. There may not be quite enough room to take a 20% price hike on something that's already priced at $40 or $50. That's a really big real price increase. What we're seeing is that more often people are looking at those middle price points there, and to me, what that says, if most of the items that are getting an increase of any kind are in that $5 to $20 range, well, those are your entrees. Those are your entrees, especially at limited service restaurants. And then the degree to which they are being increased, which is the column all the way on the right there, we are taking more price in a relative sense for those items that are already kind of lower priced. So it's a really interesting way, I think, to look at it. And so one thing that we wanted to look at too was by actual food category. And when we asked our audience last week to guess which menu item saw the largest price increase out of all the ones that we track, the clue was whimsical ideas never go stale, because that is an anagram for wings. So chicken wings showed the highest menu price inflation on average as a category. 56% of all wing offerings across the country took some sort of menu price increase. And so to get to a 10.3% overall increase, back of the envelope math roughly means that those wings that got a price increase probably got about a 20% increase. And that's for bone-in and boneless. And, that's just driven by, dynamics of not only are there supply chain constraints, but, the chicken wing there are only 2 wings per bird. You can't get more off of a chicken. And they're driving the price of the entire bird. So there are lots of different menu categories to look at. Over there on the left, the highest price, like I said before, was wings. But then you're seeing a lot of the other entrees, the other protein categories, really showing a lot of upward movement. That's probably going to make it hard for a lot of members on this call to retain their pricing power. And over on the right, with beverages and bottled alcohol, there's just a little bit less room to maneuver that way. So a few of the lessons that we kind of want to just point out again in closing here is that, menu price inflation on restaurants is broadly going to lag CPI a little bit. So at the end of 2021, we saw inflation overall in the country was 7%. Menu price inflation was 5.7%. So it's not usually going to exceed or totally match that. But nonetheless, it's still going to be tremendous pressure on your profitability. And it's not going to fall equally across the industry. Right now, the bigger price increases are being taken at limited service restaurants in quick service and fast casual, usually because there's a little bit more room to bring those prices up and not be at too much of a disadvantage against full service restaurants or against food at home right now. And the approach that most of the operators are taking, rather than just take the entire menu up by a small couple of basis points, folks are really taking a targeted approach, and where they can take a price increase, they're being aggressive. So that might be the way to go, because you just may have some categories that allow for that right now, and you can still kind of keep your best sellers competitively priced if that is what you are kind of basing your menu strategy around. but probably about 40% of all menu items increased in price to some degree. And because it was kind of focused on the categories where you could take price, that price increase was pretty aggressive. So in total, it was about 15.2%. And that's among the items that did have an increase. So I know that the math worked out to about 5.7% menu price inflation overall, but it was made by taking a large increase on a fewer number of items. It's higher among entrees. It is lower among the categories where we try to build our average check. So lower among things like beverages, sides, desserts, and appetizers. And again, it's a reaction to higher food costs, certainly higher labor costs as well. Those are kind of working in tandem against us all right now. And in particular, we are seeing the biggest problems with proteins because there are so many inputs that are rising all over the place, and they all go into the systems that we have for farming livestock and animals. So the question then is going to be how to beat inflation, and the answer is always the same. Well, at least in the view of Datassential, the answer to beat inflation is with innovation. These next few slides, I'll go through kind of quickly because if you have been watching our bi-weekly webinars for the last couple of years, we've been using them a little bit, repeating them just to kind of reiterate the point that you don't want to solve this question of consumers' lower buying power just with a value strategy and a value strategy alone. You need to have innovation and new menu news at price points beyond just the low end to still maintain your traffic, but then also maintain your sales levels with the folks that are coming in. This circled figure here was at the end of 2009. This is a monthly percentage of new menu offerings and items that fell into the combo meal and value item category. And so at that one point in the depth of that Great Recession, almost 2 out of 5 new items in that month were some sort of value offering, combo meal, dollar menu. And I think we all learned back then, more than a decade ago, that was probably too much. It probably couldn't be helped at the time. I was working for NRN at that moment and reporting on the industry, and everybody was doing this because really our hands were forced. What choice do we have? But in the kind of ups and downs of the economy since, I think that we've gotten better at evening that out a little bit. It's more cyclical, and we haven't really responded in the pandemic in quite the same way of going overboard and overdoing the innovation only on the low end or on the value spectrum. One thing that we'll just kind of wrap up with here is that this is a graphical representation of the kinds of foods that people prefer to get away from home versus getting from home and making themselves. That top chart of all of these foods that folks want to get from restaurants and want to get from food service rather than try and make it home with what they buy from the grocery store. A lot of it is these global flavors that are frankly executed better in a food service environment than at home. And so a lot of ways that we can come up with adopting a new flavor from a global cuisine and finding an application that's more familiar in the ways that we already serve food to our customers. So barring global flavors and global applications, it doesn't have to just be the flavor. I think of things like an egg roll that is filled with buffalo chicken or a Philly cheesesteak flavor. It works that way too. So whether it's flavors or applications, there are a lot of new things that can get us credit for innovation from outside of American cuisine. Because lastly, this is just another way to look at it. In that left column, these are all the things that people prefer to get away from home rather than at home. All the way at the bottom, the only thing that rates highest for getting at home is American food, stuff that we are probably a little bit burnt out on and bored with after 2 years cutting back on restaurant visits and staying home. So we would always sort of encourage you to look sort of beyond to global flavors and to what we kind of call inception level ingredients. That's on our menu adoption cycle at Datassential. Things that get their start in specialty markets or kind of fine dining in big cities on kind of innovator restaurant menus. Those are the places to look for kind of that next, exciting flavor that you can bring onto your menu in some application that's familiar in a way that really will, we think, still drive a lot of excitement, drive traffic and trial, but then also maintain your ability to get, the revenue that you need to make your profitability. So Kevin, that's the end of my presentation.
That was awesome, Mark. Thank you so much. It was really, and there's some good questions I think we'll be asking here. Jason, Knoll, I see you're on with us now. Let's have a little chat with you on what's happening in your world. First of all, can you chime in a little bit about, what surprised you in Mark's presentation? Was there anything in there that really surprised you, or were there things you were just nodding your head going, oh my God, this is exactly it?
I was completely surprised by the price increases and how they related to each segment individually. That was kind of like a wow. And it makes me ask the question, is everybody taking one big price increase, 2 increases, 3 increases? And what's kind of the recommendation? You kind of want to parallel inflation, but at the same time, I did like in your segment where you said we're kind of behind, right? We're not moving as fast as inflation is. So what is your recommendations?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how that was sequenced kind of quarter by quarter or month by month. I think we just took a 12-month look at it and sort of, so by the end of the year, they were at a level about, 1.3% below total inflation. But, from segment to segment and restaurant to restaurant, there's probably, the right time to take it. And I don't know how many increases they broke it up. If they did just one in the middle of the year, at the end of the year, or if they did kind of drips and drabs throughout the year. I can't speak to that for sure. I would guess that we've heard public comments from some of the public restaurant companies that some waited as long as they could and then finally took kind of the big increase and just got it over with, ripped the Band-Aid off, and some tried to be more subtle about it. I would guess if you are targeting menu items, and doing the approach of, finding fewer items where you can take a more aggressive price increase, then I would probably look to do that in maybe 1 or 2 stages. So I guess I wouldn't recommend death by 1,000 cuts. I would probably try to do it once or twice a year.
Awesome. So can I get one more question here, Kevin?
Yeah, please, Jason.
All right. So I'm going to show my age for a second. In the 70s, Mom would bring home chicken wings and backs, and they were free when you bought, 5 whole chickens, right?
Yeah.
You get a pound bag. What's the next chicken wing? What's the next commodity that is underrated, underpriced, that we can now jump into and still charge a premium for, but help protect our margins?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I think that there's a lot of room for beverage innovation right now, because there definitely is room for those prices to go up if you have something exciting to charge for. And I think that you sort of see that with some of the more healthful beverages that are being pitched in retail and in food service. So that's probably one place where I think you can bring in an exciting flavor. It's a good application for something like that. I think that there's definitely some room to take price in that. And thus far, by number of items and the degree to which that increase has gone up, I think that there's still some opportunity there in the beverage world. In food and in produce, I think really none of the proteins are helping you out right there. I don't know about food items. I think that we saw fresh vegetables and fresh fruit, kind of in general right now, those are low single digit percentages of inflation. So and we know that plant-based and plant-focused eating it's still a very popular growing trend with a lot of positive press and excitement behind it. So I think that there might be places where you can innovate around vegetables in the center of the plate, or maybe you could even reduce the portion of proteins a little bit in some of your maybe noodle focused or stir fry and vegetable focused dishes. I think there's a way to kind of pull back on some of the proteins, but not eliminate entirely. Showcase vegetables and produce a little bit more. And then that's all kind of a way that can be done, that's all a way that you can do to kind of find the right combination to have a really attractive price point that covers your costs and is profitable, but is not going to cause a lot of sticker shock.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And Jason, just so people know, I think most of you know him anyway, but Jason is the Vice President of Culinary for Another Broken Egg. Also, people that you can see on your screen now, too. We have Kyle Watts. Kyle's a national account sales for Ripple Foodservice. Got a good point we're going to bring up with him in a minute. We have Stan Dorsey, Corporate Executive Chef and Director of Menu Development for Beef O'Brady's and Brass Tap. I want to go to Stan first. You heard probably a little bit of those comments, but I want to talk to you a little bit about your feeling on price increases and kind of like your philosophy and your organization and what you're looking at and how you're attacking this dilemma, if you will.
Well, we've taken quite a few price increases the last few months. I've been around a long time in this business. It's like 40 something years. And I'll be honest with you, it's very scary. I know I was with a company called Bacorp a while back, and we were kind of like the premium brand in that family dining category. And I know the day after Desert Storm started, there was just a huge shift in people's mentality. People got nervous, kind of like I'm sure people have been about Russia and Ukraine. And the Baker Square brand, the sales just dropped like a rock and it never recovered. I know when I left there were about 120, and I think there's 4 now. There's almost nothing. So it's very scary. I mean, prices are going up like nuts. The vendors are, which I totally understand, are not living by the contract, but I totally understand. Their costs are going up exponentially too. So yeah, we've taken price increases, and I mean, it's just not a good situation. I mean, it's just really not a good situation.
Stan, have your increases been across the menu in all categories, or have there been categories where you've been able to hold off?
Yeah, it's we've kind of been across the whole menu so that it didn't, like one of our steak products went from mid 4s to mid 8s a pound, and in no time. And you just can't, if you stick with, your normal 30% food cost or less, I mean, you can't raise the price of an entree at $16 overnight. So something else you have to kind of give and take across the whole menu just to even things out. some things just, they just have to step in and take an increase, even though nothing's happening there, although there are many of those where nothing's happening. But it's, and we're doing a little bit as far as trying to look at some proteins that are less costly and develop some menu items around them. Kind of offer some stuff where it's has a better food cost for us, and the menu price just doesn't get out of control.
Hey, I've got a question too, just to lob in for anybody that wants to answer this. But Mark, you had a comment there, part of your presentation was really cool about that people were looking at less increases on check building items, which I think is genius and makes a lot of sense. So can any of you guys speak to that, where you're there's some areas where you're just not tackling it because you feel like you want to make sure that you're still building that check and you're still getting the volume that you need in sales, versus maybe alienated in category by raising the price. Jason, Stan, any?
I'm never afraid to jump in. Coffee is just kind of one of those things where we sell a lot of coffee, so you jump it up a nickel and you get there. But we've nickeled it and dimed it to death. And so, you just can't charge $4 for a refillable coffee at a table. So that's one of those kind of, always in the past easy one, but now it's just, you can't touch it because at some point people are going to say, I'm just not going to have coffee. But to Mark's point, we're selling a ton more alcohol. And people don't mind. We're paying, charging $12 for a margarita, and it's almost paying for the bottle of Milagro with the first one we sell. And crushing it.
Is that a relatively new offering for Another Broken Egg?
We have just gotten around to pounding our chests and talking about it, making no apologies. So, we're doing close to 15 to 18% alcohol in a breakfast, lunch, and brunch, where we were 5 years ago, we were 3 to 5%.
That's great.
So it really, I think it illustrates your point earlier that people are good with this.
Yeah, our alcohol sales are definitely seem to be a little more price resilient. We've taken some price there, and we haven't got many comments, I guess, because everybody's going up. But we are starting to get some comments about pricing on food. So what we're trying to do is look for some items, like I said, that, I'll just give you an example. Skirt steak is like $8 and something a pound, but pot roast is still about $4. So you can use some, and chicken, even though chicken's gone up and it's hard to come by, is still much less than some of the other things. So you just kind of have to divert your strategy and use some of the proteins that are, if you can get them, that are a little bit more cost effective.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears here. Kyle, we had a little, brief comments last week from you about, which I thought was really intriguing, about your philosophy on you don't want to, adapt to a lower quality product, to give in to these price increases. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the vendor and the restaurant also having a discussion on the value of certain ingredients. So here's a good example. Did you guys know that over 50% of the world's sunflower oil comes from Ukraine, and it comes from Eastern Ukraine? And if you look at your plant-based suppliers' labels, I will guarantee you that sunflower oil is probably the third ingredient. And so we're being faced, Ripple, in terms of our standards and in terms of the unique formulations it takes to be a milk substitute, to be good for the planet. It's a very unique chemistry that us plant-based folks have to hit. We spent years perfecting it, and this is throwing it all into a jumble, and we have to kind of figure it out, but still keep true to our environmental promises and our nutritional promises. And I think it just touched on a larger scenario. I ran into it this week. R&D was Kyle, can we add a stabilizer to our milk? And I'm I I don't know. I could make a few phone calls to our largest customers. They're like, we're desperate. We need it. We're going to run out of sunflower oil. We got to make a change. So I think as you guys look at your big suppliers outside of plant-based, just knowing what's in their ingredient list and what you value and what you can make breaks on, I think is a helpful conversation to have. Because we're making a lot of choices right now with these ingredient changes and these supply constraints. And we're not always making those changes with customer consultations. It's happening pretty quickly. So that was my feedback. It's an interesting time right now.
I know it's a sensitive subject matter to talk about price increases or whatnot, but are you just looking at it and saying we're not going to take as much of an increase as we should take because of these increases, but we're trying to keep the line? What's your philosophy?
Yeah, we took our first price. Ripple took their first, and I speak for the plant-based segment. A lot of plant-based folks took price at the end of the year. Silk did it, Ripple did it, Oatly did it. But the sunflower oil thing didn't happen until Vladimir invaded Ukraine. So there probably will be another price increase coming, I think, for the industry. At the very least, keep an eye on your plant-based milk suppliers or plant-based food suppliers and see if their ingredient label is changing. If they're not taking price, see if their ingredient label is changing and make sure you're okay with that. Because they're probably making a trade-off somewhere. Yeah.
Very cool. So Mike Turner has joined us. Mike, good to see you.
Hey guys, how are you?
For those who don't know, he's VP of, I love this, culinary and supply chain. We'll talk about that in a second for Walk-Ons Enterprises. You and I had a conversation, I don't know, like a few weeks ago or so about, you made the line, which I thought was awesome. He said, if somebody told me 5 years ago I'd be doing all the stuff that I'm doing today in my job, I'd think you're out of your mind. You want to start with that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I've 90% of what I do today is all supply chain, and it really is navigating the futures. I wake up at 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning. I start with bar chart, looking at what we think the futures are going to be. I read every article on Fox Business, and I look at the USDA farm reports, and I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening in the market. And then I come in and I really watch what I think is going to happen 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year out, and trying to get ahead of everything. What I've learned about being in this job is that you have to have incredible relationships with your vendors. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you've got to have a crystal ball, and hopefully you can see the future. Now, the history and historical trends will tell us something about what's going to happen in the future, because even though COVID has kind of hit us, there are some trends that you can follow along. But I spend a lot of time in the data and really in the forecasting and looking at forecasting models to try and protect our brand. We're growing 20 restaurants a year. We buy a lot of groceries. If our volumes are off, we're going to feel it. We have a responsibility to our guests and to our franchisees to make sure that we've got product coming in the back door. So a majority of my days and nights are spent really around procurement, making sure we have the products that we need.
That's awesome. I want to just open the floor to all of you and just say, what's some final comments about, our conversation today? Where we are, where we're going, and, so let's put our positive hats on. What can we say now that's positive? Because it's a tough industry out there right now. But what can we say that's positively coming out of this will be much more positive in the future?
Well, comp sales are definitely still up. Which is nobody to cook it and nobody to serve it and no food to cook. But other than that, that's a positive. The demand is still strong.
That's awesome. Others, Jason, Mike, Kyle, Mark?
Yeah, I guess I can review one thing is that, the response that we saw 10 plus years ago, the last time the consumers really got hammered like they have been, the industry responded by kind of overdoing it on the value side of the menu equation, and I think that we're doing a much better job now of innovating different parts beyond just value, really giving people new menu news and new things to come in for. And then when you do that, you don't have, a hand tied behind your back, being tied to just the lowest price points. So I think the industry response has been better and more informed this time around compared with 2009.
I would say that tough times condition you. I think you become a better restaurant operator when you're going through tough times like this. I think what we've learned is that you got to manage the middle of your P&L a whole lot smarter than you used to. That sales are great and sales cure all woes, but we've got our guys focusing on every BevNap, every apron, every towel, the things that we've known being in the business for 20 or 30 years. We're reinstituting those things because it's difficult to control what's coming in the back door right now in regards to pricing, and we'll do the best that we can. But when the product hits our back door to the time it goes out of the window and to our guest, we can control that. We control the environment, we control the ambiance, we control who we hire, who we fire, we control what comes out of our window, and we control the quality. And I think what we're really focusing on is, I think the strong brands are going to survive. I think we've got to continue to provide these emotional connections to food, and give our guests this unbelievable dining experience, and what we like to say, be more than a restaurant, but also really focus on the details of managing the business and teach our franchisees how to make money in tough times right now. And that's what we're really trying to focus on. And so far, we've had a high level of success, knock on wood.
Awesome. Kyle, any final thoughts?
No, amen to what Michael just said. I mean, we'll figure this out. It makes us a better supplier, makes us a smarter business. And luckily, the way the plant-based segments have grown, like there's a lot more suppliers out there than there were a couple of years ago, and but it is also interesting when you're really tested, right? The costs have gone up. Are you really an environmentally friendly company? Or are you going to make that switch to that easier ingredient? It's cool to see the leaders here make the right choices. So, yeah. Thanks,
That's good to hear. Dan made a comment too in our chat session, just saying to go to your website. So are there some things on your website that are kind of like talk to this or?
Yeah, I mean, Ripple Foods, we're a certified B corporation. So our compensation, our awards, incentives are tied to our environmental performance. And that's all on the website. And so, yeah, we sort of forced our own hand. And when these things happen, we kind of have to go a certain direction with the environment.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. You guys have been great. It's been really good content. The hour always flies by. Just a couple of comments. I just want people to, remember, go to our websites and see information about our upcoming events. We have the NRA reception. A lot of people have been responding to that. So hopefully we'll have a good turnout. I think we're going to have a really good turnout at that event, May 21st at the Peninsula Hotel. Again, that's all on the website. And then ICCA is a culinary immersion in Boise. We have one in Cleveland for GCIA. And then at the end of the year in October, we're going to be in San Diego for the GCIA annual culinary combine. So hopefully you guys will all be able to join us. From a member perspective, we're not charging any registration fees for the ICCA Summit or the Culinary Combine. So all you have to do is just respond, pay your dues, and you get that for free. So, and that being said, I just want to thank all of our members and sponsors who are on today. Really appreciate it. Any feedback you have on future webinars and themes and ideas that we need to do, please let us know on that. And our next webinar is going to be May 3rd. It's the first Tuesday of every month, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. And look forward to seeing you all here real soon. So thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. We're going to close out again with the video mic. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you soon.